Okay, so I don't know how well this is going to go, but I'm going to try to give a kind of commentary, maybe less than a response, to this video done by Thunderfoot called Why Do People Laugh at Creationist Part 35. Now, I first off, I don't want to get caught in all this creationist versus dogmatic atheist stuff. I'm very sympathetic to, I think, Thunderfoot's concern over the ridiculous creationist dogma and the way that people are now turning to the Bible as if it's going to rival scientific explanation for human origins, or as if we're best to come to an empirical understanding of ourselves and our world through claims made of the Bible. I mean, in some way, I'm really right on with that. Another part of me, and this would be my commentary, it's sort of a criticism, I guess, but it's the way that people are thinking about what religion or what theological beliefs are and are supposed to be. I thought one thing that was so interesting is in that Thunderfoot video, he has this little scale where he compares Newton's contributions to science and Newton's contributions to Christianity. What was so interesting in there is that he didn't talk about Newton's contributions to mathematics. Contributions to mathematics, are those more like contributions to science or more like contributions to religion? Now, this would, again, really be the way to come into it. That I think, first off, it's obvious that Newton's religious beliefs didn't prohibit him from making scientific discoveries. This also is part of the problem with the way that the dogmatism in some of the contemporary YouTube atheist community sort of going on, where people act like if anyone has any kind of theological sympathies at all, they obviously don't understand science or are against science or something. Well, here we have a clear case of someone who had pretty significant religious beliefs, and yet he still made great contributions to science. And it wasn't that one prevented it, right? It wasn't that his beliefs somehow obscured his other thinking. But if you go back to the math question, okay, mathematics is a human invention, but it's also a kind of discovery. It's both. That is, not only is math a kind of counting activity that is a property of brains and of relations that we can orderly perceive, but once that tautological system has been generated, now we just do deductions. It's not an empirical inductive system that's subject to empirical scientific testing. That is, we're not trying to calculate the next highest prime number or the next digit of pi through empirical scientific testing. No, science and math are in fact distinct fields. Science can't test math, but math is the language that science uses. And I think the more that people would maybe see that some of the, I guess I'll say, scientifically inclined physicists, or I'm sorry, mathematically inclined physicists or mathematically inclined scientists, I think they may have a notion of God as regularity, as principles of order, and it's a deductive system. It's not inductive. It's not like you're trying to discover whether or not there's a God. You begin with God as a principle. Think of it as the difference this way, that science seems to be something like a truth-seeking system. That is, we create models, we try to falsify in some extent, we try to build coherent, predictable hypotheses that have predictions, and then we in some way try to navigate our world a little bit better through those models, through those predictions, and we try to make our models more and more accurate or more and more useful. But I think in all those cases, we're trying to test and discover truth about the world. I'm not sure that that's the case with mathematics. We're partly trying to discover it, but we're discovering what began with a postulate of, 1 is not 2, and, 1 and 0. Are these really numbers? Are they rules? Are they meta rules? I think when we go to the actual history of mathematics, we find the history of 0 is quite complicated. Even 1, the question of how can 0 divided by 0 be 1? Well, how can it be indeterminate? Why isn't it just 0? There's all these, again, very complicated questions. Questions about why the square root of -1 is used in telecommunications formula, and how much imaginary objects of mathematics have had direct relations in the physical world, right? I mean, I think there is an applicability to mathematics within science. I mean, science takes the language of math and it applies it, but math and science are not really of the same order. If anything, math is more akin to a kind of religion. That is, it's a deductive, tautological system that you begin with as a truth-keeping. Now, I say, for example, that I don't know, that all humans have an inherent dignity and a right to life, and that there is something like a sacredness to human existence. And by that sacredness, I mean that this is a truth as a beginning point. Now, if someone's going to say, well, we need to invent scientifically some meter that tells us of whether or not there is or is not sacredness out there in the world, I would say this is confusing. It's a category mistake. It's sort of like, when we postulate right angles in geometry, we can do right angles in mathematical objects that, they're pure. We do have these, pure 180-degree inner sum sort of stuff. But that doesn't mean that triangles in the real world are that way. But no, these models are helpful and useful. If someone says, honor your father and mother, it's not that we want to say, is that been empirically tested to be true? This is truth as a starting point. I think the more that people could try to understand the difference between truth-keeping and truth as a creative starting point and truth as a mode of inquiry and collective discovery that's done through science, I think we could see that they're not really competing. And I guess I'm sort of sympathetic to those who want to challenge creationists, but another part of me wants to say, look, this is a category mistake. People shouldn't be trying to use the Bible to explain the world's origins. These should be seen as stories of that are illustrating human psychology at a certain point of history, and that they're very useful in giving wisdom that we can learn from and that we can take in certain ways and understand in our culture from a certain perspective. And again, see great wisdom there. Take love. If I say there is such a thing as love, and I believe in love, and I think that love is important and needed in the world, for someone to come along and say, well, I'm a scientist and I haven't seen any evidence for love and I don't believe in love, well, that's like me saying I don't see any evidence for zero. I don't see any claim that there is such a thing as zero, and yet you use zero in order to do these great achievements in society. Well, maybe love is a little bit like zero. It's a beginning point that we start as a postulate, and then we try to see the world through it in the same way that we, even if we don't encounter any real, and by that I mean actual triangles in the mathematical sense, but we can have an idealized mathematical sense of a triangle that becomes very useful in the messy, sticky, ambiguous world out there. All said and done, I thought that video was interesting, but I think it's unfortunate. It really brings out, right, that you don't have to be, what do you want to say, anti-religious. People don't have to be so anti-religious in order to still be scientific. I mean, there have been many people in history who have made great contributions in science, and they've still had some notion of religion or spirituality. To just blanketly say it's going to be an obstacle, I think that's partly naive, especially when we look at mathematics. I mean, mathematics is a language, and it's a language to which science has had to defer, but there's a faith in numbers, and there's a faith in the human mind and its capacity to work with numbers that isn't subject to scientific testing, short of the way that we're able to apply it. And I think the same could be said of some of these other sort of ethical principles about dignity, about respect, about love. To ask for them to be real in the world without us operating by them is the same thing as trying to ask for the square root of -1 or even 0. Are these real? Well, the consequences are real if you get people's thought and action to actually move according to them. Okay, thank you.